Found it. Well, we're...
The branch of linguistics and logic concerned with meaning. There are a number of branches and sub-branches of semantics, including formal semantics, which studies the logical aspects of meaning, such as sense, reference, implication,
AKA
logical
the
form.
meaning of a word.
Yep.
That's the
Very
short
nice.
definition. She looked at me yesterday and goes, "You can't win an argument with a Brown," and I said, "You're going to do just fine."
That's why it's hard when there's a brown and a brown.
Actually, look on his face. You don't you don't win an argument with that one, because even if he's dead wrong, he will defend his argument dead to rights.
Yes.
That is not how
generally...
That's probably...
Try me, dude.
That's generally,
I grew up with you.
true. So, all right. This morning we are in the book of Jeremiah, chapter number 6, verse. We're just going to be looking at one verse and kind of breaking this down over the next couple of weeks. It's not in there, is it? I didn't think so. Jeremiah 6, and verse number 16. Now, the preface for this lesson is not so much the subject matter that we're going to be dealing with as a whole. It's more of an information. It's more for our own information. It's to help us help others. I do kind of want to say that because the way I've titled it, it kind of gives it a little bit of a negative connotation. It kind of makes you think that I'm up here thinking that everybody is a backslider when I'm not. I feel like that a lot of times as Christians we overlook things from time to time and don't really understand why some of the things are in the Bible for us to help others. And I hope by the time this is all said and done with, this kind of helps make sense. But anyway, Jeremiah chapter 6, verse number 16 says, "Thus saith the Lord, stand ye in the ways and see and ask for the old paths, where is the good way, and walk therein, and ye shall find rest for your souls. But they said, we will not walk therein." And then just to kind of give us a little bit of background history for those of you that don't fully understand or know who Jeremiah is. Jeremiah was God's voice in a time when Israel was satisfied with where God had brought them. And they didn't see the need for God that they once did. There's a lot of parallels. I'm sure you've heard this by preachers and teachers and everything else throughout time. If you've been to church much in your life, I can't get my throat clear. One of the things that you're going to find if you're studying the Bible and you're paying attention to the nation of Israel is you're going to see a lot of parallels between the nation of Israel, and you can draw those to the state of affairs in the United States with today's Christianity. There's a lot of parallels with where the nation of Israel has been, where they've come from, what God has done, how God has blessed the nation of Israel down through the annals of time, and then you can look at how God has blessed the United States, how the United States came to be, what it was founded on, the principles, the foundations of this country and everything else. And then you see how the nation of Israel would fall away from God. You see how America has fallen away from God. You'll see how Israel would come back to God, and how the great revivals down through the years and the ages here, how America has turned back to God. And it usually takes a drastic measure for things to cause us as individuals or us collectively as a nation to cause us to want to turn back to God. One of the last greatest moves that drove America back to the church was 9/11. And churches were full and everything else. People saw a need and a desperate need to have God back in their life, and they came back in droves. And then as time went on, just as with the nation of Israel when they needed a move from God, when they were getting tired of making mud bricks with no straw and everything else for the Egyptians. God raised up Moses and took them out of Egyptian bondage, and how they had went back and forth in and out of bondage all down through their history. America hasn't necessarily went through any type of overthrow or type of Egyptian bondage or anything like that. It's just been the growing cold and the hot, getting serious for God and growing cold and indifferent to God, that has defined America in a lot of ways. A lot of people don't want to believe that, but that is the truth. That's just the way it's the way it's been. So as we see as we're going through, we're going to see a lot of you can look through the nation of Israel's history and see a lot of parallels with the way things have been here in the United States. Jeremiah had a difficult task of trying to convince them of God's coming judgment if they didn't turn back to God. This broke Jeremiah's heart and the love he had for God's people, and due to that, he would openly weep while prophesying to them what God had put in his heart. And we see that today. In a lot of your good churches, you'll see a man of God get up and give everything that God has given him in a 45-minute sermon on Sunday mornings, and then Sunday nights you come back to that church and there's very few people that put enough emphasis on God to come back to Sunday night service. There's even fewer that put the emphasis of needing God in their life that comes back on a Wednesday night service. So as you see, that again, this is another one of those parallels that we see with the nation of Israel. The nation of Israel was at a position to where they didn't need God. America has been in that position. We as human beings, as individuals, how many of you this morning had to get up and worry what you was going to eat, worry how you was going to get to church, if you was going to be able to make it at all? Very few of us had to deal with that. People used to, that was a big thing, 60, 70, 80 years ago. People depended on God to move and work. I remember, just to kind of draw a little story out here. You heard the story of a missionary being in a country with an orphanage, and how the lady that was over this orphanage, she would get up every day and have to pray to God that that God would provide food for the kids there in that orphanage and everything else. And she would get up and pray, and God would move and work. And then one day there was this gentleman in town that decided he was going to show her up, and he came in and he provided a week's worth of groceries and stuff for the orphanage. And how she got up and she was the next morning, and he was off in a distance watching and everything else and laughing at her and everything else. And then after she come out and was going on and on and on about how good God had done and how God had blessed and was taking care of the nurse, the orphanage and stuff, how he steps out and starts laughing at her and mocking her and scorning her and telling her God didn't do nothing, I did that, and everything else, and is throwing off on her faith in God and everything else, to the point to where when he was done ridiculing her, she thanked God for using the devil to provide for the orphanage and stuff. So as we see, that was a thing that we had a lot of, in America. That was something that we depended on. We used to fully rely and depend on God. Yet today we have the blessings that we have. We have, good paying jobs to where we don't have to worry about how we're going to pay our bills. We have money to put in our gas tanks and drive. And a lot of times we don't even take the time to thank God for blessing us with that, with the things that we need to sustain ourselves. And every good thing, the Bible tells us, every good thing comes from God. Everything that we have, everything that all the blessings, it's nothing that we've done on our own. God has been able to work and move in a lot of people's hearts and stuff to provide and open doors for us to be able to step through and to be able to have what we have. It's dependent, a lot of times it's largely dependent on our perspective. If we're dialed into God, we'll see God moving and working in our lives and stuff. But if we're not, we're just going to take it for granted. And that's where America is today. And that's where the nation of Israel has been, and especially in the time of Jeremiah. Jeremiah, like I said, he was the weeping prophet. He when God would give him a harsh saying, he would weep because of the love that he had for his own country, for the love that he had for God's people. He would openly weep while trying to give them and warn them about what God was fixing to do. The first half of Jeremiah, and then starting in Jeremiah chapter 3, we're not going to turn there, but Jeremiah 3:6, we're in Jeremiah chapter number 6, John, verse number 16. I didn't write it on the board, but yeah, because I was a little late getting started. But anyway, and starting in Jeremiah 3, chapter 3, verse number 6, this is where God starts putting it on Jeremiah, telling him, tell the people that, captivity's coming. I'm fixing to judge the nation of Israel because of the fact that they've turned their back on me yet once again. And he's going to, just like a parent is going to chasten and their children to keep them hopefully from becoming a spoilt brat or whatever. God is going to chasten those who he loves. The Bible tells us that. He's going to bring things in our life if we're his. And we're getting away from God. He's going to bring challenges. He's going to bring things in our life that's going to either drive us further away from him or drive us back to him. And that's what God was telling Jeremiah here, starting in chapter 3, verse number 6, and then that goes all the way up to chapter number 5. We see God dealing with Israel's backslidden condition. They had backslidden on God. Now, just to kind of ask a question, who knows the definition of what it means to be backslidden? Anybody? Nobody knows what you would define as a backslidden individual?
Well, if you go to Hebrews chapter number 6 and verse number 6, talks about people who have, and actually I have it marked, Hebrews, it specifically says that they shall fall away to renew them again unto repentance, seeing that they crucify themselves the Son of God of flesh and put them to an open shame. It's people who have actively fallen away from God.
That's true. That's biblical, scriptural. That is the scriptural definition. But I would this is just my ism here, okay? If that's a word, I doubt it is, but we just made it up on the fly. The longer you're around me, the more you're going to see that I do that. I make up a lot of stupid words and everything else.
Better than just being stupid.
I've got two people here. Are they going to attest to that? Those two witnesses?
Oh yeah, they've seen it firsthand. But do what? That's just my nature. That's who I am. But to go along with what Jeremiah told us, if they're at any point in your time, you are closer to God than you are right now. And you can look back and say, well, I remember, the other day, I could feel God moving in my life, but I've not felt him in a day or two. Then we've slipped away. We've not fully gone to the extreme in being backslidden. But any time in your life that you're not as close to God as you was at some point in your past, then you've backslid. You've progressively, whether you realize it or not, and a lot of times that's what gets us, and I say us because that's one of the things that gets me a lot of times, is that we can experience the move of God in our life, whether it be in our study or our prayer time or whatever, and then we'll miss a day. And then that becomes 2 days or whatever, or we're still going through the motions. How many of you know that you can actually be the most faithful church member of this church and still be backslidden? That's just how easy it is to backslide. Now, it doesn't mean that we're too far gone or anything like that, but that's what God was dealing with Jeremiah here in this passage of Scripture, with the coming judgment that he was fixing to bring on Judah because they had turned away. It doesn't mean that we're here one day and then we just decide we're not coming back to church, and then we start hitting up every bar in town and everything else, and that's all we do. It doesn't have to be that way. I mean, you could even be the most faithful church member and still be backslidden on God and cold and indifferent to the power and the movement of God in your life. So it doesn't mean, a lot of times we think, a lot of times in our minds we think that, to be backslidden or to be whatever means that we're out living in sin out in the world. No, you can be the most faithful church member and still be backslidden and cold and indifferent on God. And unfortunately, that's one of the biggest things that's been the biggest detriment to the local church in recent history. Is just we've got faithful people showing up to the house of God, but we're a million miles away spiritually from God, to the point to where we're just going through the motions. It's been so long since we've felt the power and the presence of God in our life and on us that we just, we don't even know it. It's like Samson. I mean, you remember the story of Samson. Samson, where was his power? Where did Samson get his strength from? I mean, I would make a very bad Samson right now, okay? Because I have none. But I would be a weak Samson. But it did. But it was through his hair. And when he finally told Delilah, thank you. When he finally told Delilah where his strength lied, and they came in after he had played around and played around and played around with her and everything else, and then she finally got down to his heart. And he told her the secret to his strength was in his hair. And then when the Philistines come in and shaved his head, he gets up after she tells him that the Philistines are upon him. He gets up. He was so far away. And this was one of the prominent judges for the nation of Israel at the time, in the nation of Israel during the time of the judges. He didn't even know that the power of God had departed from him. That's happening every Sunday in 90% of the churches out here. 90% of the Baptist churches, that's going on right now. In the majority of the churches in this county, there's people coming to worship God that haven't spent one moment since the last time they darkened the doors of the church with God, doing anything for God, study, prayer, whatever. Doesn't matter. They don't even know and realize that they're dead spiritually. And they're coming to church and right now the only thing keeping them in church is their own self-conscious. They're coming so that they can just say, well, I went to church. I was at church Sunday. And that's it. That's as far as the power of God goes in their life, is to just come to church and turn around and go home. They don't have the power of God in their life. And we wonder why church has been put back, and it's just something we do if it's convenient for us. For a lot of people, that's all church is convenience. If they feel like, well, I've been, I guess I ain't been to church in a couple of weeks, and our own self-conscious starts kicking in, and it's not, the pulling and the drawing of the Holy Spirit in our hearts and in our lives that's causing us to want to go to church, and then we go just to fulfill and to calm that, and then it's 2 or 3 more weeks before we come back. That's the state. That was the state of Israel in the time of Jeremiah, and that's the state of the church today in a lot of places. We've been blessed here. It's not so a lot of times here. But if we're not careful, we can see the power of God just dissipate right out of our life like a vapor if we're not careful. So, like I said, so here we see Jeremiah. He's talking about God is telling him that hey, I'm bringing judgment upon my nation. I'm going. They've walked away from me. They've left me out of their life, and a lot of times a lot of Christians. I've been there. I know this to be true. A lot of Christians, we wonder why things are so bad on us, why we're having to go through this trial and that trial, and we've got this bill over here, and the car tears up this day, and we don't know how we're going to. A lot of those things is the chastening hand of God in our life, and I've been there. I mean, I remember when I first started coming to church here again. Shortly after Johnny invited me to come back. And this was one of the first few times on a Sunday night that I came back, and that was when Lori couldn't be here on Sunday mornings, and she was coming on Sunday nights with me because she had to work. And I was just starting to come back, and we started coming on Sunday nights some and everything else. I remember my truck. This was about a year and a half ago. I didn't know what was going on with my truck. I mean, I thought my transmission was going out. I didn't know. I mean, I'm driving it, and the stinking brakes would just lock up on it. Turned out I had a bad caliper, and I had a lot of brake issues, which was affecting how the vehicle handled and everything else. I know, imagine that, right? Almost $3,000 later that I didn't have. I was and here's the sad part. When you get a bill for $3,000 and you're thankful it ain't no more than that, that's pretty bad. I mean, because I was thinking, man, I've got a 4-wheel drive transmission going out on this truck. How much is that going to cost? By the time they finally get one, how long am I going to be without a vehicle? $3,000 complete total brake job and everything else. I mean, and this was back when everything was super ridiculous high because we were just coming out of COVID and nobody had parts, and what parts were available were just ridiculously priced. I mean, the rotors for my truck are expensive when there's not a product shortage. And I paid over $200 for each one because there was a product shortage. I was just super thankful. And then I told God, one Sunday night, sitting up there in the pew, and I can take you to the pew. It ain't technically sitting exactly where it was then, but I can get you approximately to the point to where I was praying on my Sunday night, and I told God, I said, Lord, if you will help me, if you would help me out with this, I will hold up my end of the bargain. I will start doing what I know I'm supposed to do, and I will make it right. And from that point all the way up to today, barely, we almost missed it this morning because we were running late. I have paid my tithes every week. God has blessed. I've had to have some other work done to the truck, but it's just routine maintenance. But I've not had to sweat it out thinking, how much is this going to cost me? And that's the things. God will bring us through times in our life to where He's either going to put us back to where we need to be, or He's going to shove us, or we're just going to completely turn and go and do away with God and not have anything to do with God. And that's a dangerous place to be too for the Christian. So as we see, God is fixing to bring this judgment upon the nation of Israel here. And we're seeing in verses number 6, this is chapter number 6, he's dealing with where he's going to bring the judgment from. Just so he's told Jeremiah they're going to come from the north, and they're going to do this and that and everything else. And then here's how everything's going to play out. And he's telling these people, he's telling the nation of Israel this, so that when they see it, they're going to know this is of God. We put ourselves here in this position. We as individuals and Christians we know what we have to do to keep ourselves, to keep the chastening hand of God out of our life. If you don't know, the Bible's a good place to start. Start getting in this thing, and it'll teach you that. It'll help you. But like I said, here the nation of Israel, they're coming on, and then boom, right out in the middle of nowhere. If you go home and you start reading verses, pick up reading in chapter 3 and read through chapter 7, you're going to see God dealing with Jeremiah about what He's fixing to do, the judgments and the things that's fixing to come the nation of Israel's way and everything else. And then right here in verse number 16, it's an out-of-place verse. One of those little nuggets God will drop in. How many of you ever seen the cartoons growing up? I know I'm going way back here, but the cartoons or the movies where they're out in the desert and they're walking and walking and walking, and then they finally see an oasis in the middle of the desert. Every time we think it's mirage, it's not real. That's all it was always in the cartoons, and they would realize it and then have to spit all the sand out that just poured in their mouth and everything else in the cartoons. But that little oasis, when it was real and it was an oasis, that's what this verse is. In Jeremiah, we have stumbled upon one little oasis God has given the nation of Israel. If they would have just paid attention to this one verse that He had given Jeremiah, they could have saved themselves a lot of misery, a lot of problems, and everything else. And a lot of times, as Christians, when we came to church and we were dialed in, we would see the oasis that a Sunday school teacher or a song that God's put on somebody's heart, or a message that God has given the preacher. That's an oasis for us. That's God reaching out and saying, hey, listen right here. If you're paying attention, I'm trying to help you. But it's up to us to pay attention. It's up to us to catch it. It's up to us to be in a position with God so that we see what God's fixing to open up and give us. The nation of Israel was so far away, they didn't even see this verse. They didn't even catch on to what Jeremiah had told them on how they could turn back the judging hand of God if they would just listen, but they didn't. And a lot of times we as Christians could save ourselves so much if we would just pay attention and see what God has in store for us when we come to church. But not only that, but if we just pay attention and take the extra step forward. I mean, the Bible tells us about going the extra mile. If you're compelled to go 1 mile, go 2. Well, we're compelled to come to church. That's mile 1. When we go 2 is when we take what we've gotten in church and we take it home, and then we start to just continue. We go a little further. We do our own. We get serious about our own prayer life, like we talked about last week. Or we get serious about studying the Bible and reading it every day and learning more of God. That's going the extra mile. That's the oasis. And that oasis is placed out there for us to find. And it's up to us whether or not we're going to take advantage of it. If we take advantage of the oasis God gives us in our spiritual life, we would find that God would He'll open up the storehouse of blessings for us. He'll keep a lot of things away from us. It's just like a good parent, and I hate to keep using parent because, y'all are young, single for the most part, in here and everything else. But just like when we did good growing up, I can still remember some of those days. I'm not that old or senile yet, but I can remember, Mom and Dad were openly rewarding us for doing good and stuff. It didn't come with being good at school because I hated it. That's why I got to do, the second trip through the 6th grade once, because they got mad at me because they were going to hold me back in the 5th grade, and I did good through the 5th grade, so they let me go to the 6th grade. And in the 6th grade, I just said, I'm good. I don't need none of this. And I got to go around again. That was one of the times to where I got the chastening hand of my parents because they said, well, you liked it so well, do it again. So I did the 6th grade on repeat. But there's times when Mom and Dad would do something kind, do something nice for us and everything else, just like our parents, just like I've tried to do my kids, do something nice for them when they've done. What's so funny? Do I need to take you out for another treat, Bubba?
No.
Okay. He gets mad at me because I give the cat treats at home, and he says that I don't give him anything. So
So I know what he's getting for Christmas.
maybe.
Catnip.
I'll also be his best friend then. But like I said, when it comes to that thing, God will, as long as we're doing what we're supposed to do, God will bless us. But then when we start slipping away, God will send a warning to us. And like I said, we're not looking at this because I think that we're all backslidden in here. But what we're wanting to look at is that how can we take something like this and be a blessing to someone else? Because there is a verse in the Bible, Galatians 6 and verse 1, that tells us that if we're those that are spiritual, let me turn to it right quick so I can get it just right, because, I don't have the best memory. Let me get my eyeballs down here to where I can see. Because my family will probably laugh at me. But it says, brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. Even though we're talking about being backslidden, how do we get to that backslidden? We experience a fault in our life. And those of us that are spiritual, it's our responsibility to try to help those that have fallen away from God and restore them back into fellowship. Now, there has to be a desire on that individual. You can try to help somebody, but if they don't want to help themselves, it's just like any addict out here. If they don't want to help themselves, then you're wasting your time. Doesn't mean we shouldn't try. We should always be willing to try and help. But if they're not willing and if they're not ready to help themselves, that's the same way it is with a Christian. If a Christian's not willing to do what they need to restore themselves back, doesn't mean we shouldn't try. We shouldn't pray for them, because we should. But when they're ready, we should be there to help them, not judge them, but help them with what? Meekness. Because without God in our life, we could find ourselves in the exact same spot, the exact same place as that individual. So just kind of the introduction here on what we're entitling the Backslider's Roadmap Back to God. All right, we are free to go. I heard the second bell. Sorry to keep you.